And we're live.
And we are live. Hello and welcome to Of the People. Erica, how are you?
I'm freaking great, Robert. How are you?
I'm still on the post-election high, although the new conspiracy theories are already out there, right? So in
Yeah.
2016, the Russians did it, and
Yeah.
now you're hearing this murmur underground that the Mossad did it. So now it's Israel's fault that Trump got elected. It's
How is
like
it Israel's fault?
just
The
yeah,
space lasers? Is it the Jewish space lasers again?
I don't know. I don't know. In any event, you have to be able to accept defeat, look in the mirror. I
Yeah.
mean, Bill Maher did a great look. I'm not a big Bill Maher fan, but Bill Maher did a great monologue where basically said, look in the mirror, try to figure out why you guys lost. And
Yeah.
they really lost because, and we're going to talk about it in the monologue in a second, they lost because they lost touch with who American middle class was and the policies are not the policies of Sam Nunn and which dates you anyway, or Sam Irvin, which were your father's Democrats. In any event, let's roll them. Ladies and gentlemen, we have two great guests coming on. Hillel Fold, who is the marketer for Israel. He's one of the leading tech, tech influencers in the world,
Yes.
and there's so much going on in Israel, and it really comes back to what we were talking about on
Yeah.
Israel Appreciation Day, and later on we have John Sidelides, geopolitics expert, talk a little bit about how the world may have changed now that
Yes.
Trump's coming back in power. But
Yeah.
let's roll to the monologue. A lot to do, and we're coming to you special at a new hour at 11 a.m. East Coast time.
Yes. Yes. And hold on, Robert, before we roll the monologue, I want you to check your audio, your mic settings. Something happened. It sounds like it's not picking up your mic. So before I want to make sure our audience gets the best possible uh
Got it.
you
Thank
know.
you.
And I'll bet you it's much better
Oh,
now.
that sounds so much sexier, Robert. I can hear the bass in your voice. Let's do it.
Love that. Let's roll. Hello, and welcome to Of the People, Politics and Numerology. In this case, the two numbers to watch are the numbers 2 and the numbers 18. 2 as in Trump 2.0. Last week was a great week for the country. I would argue it's probably even a better week for Israel now that they will have a real friend back in the Oval Office, one who understands that what makes Israel important is not just because it's the Jewish homeland and not just because it's a strategic U.S. ally or the main strategic U.S. ally in the Middle East, but for everything else that makes Israel so seminally important. So the other thing that flows from that is the two-state solution, which has been the bedrock of U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East for over 50 years, is now thankfully dead. You will see a reinvigorated Abraham Accords. Maybe we get to bring Morocco into this, and some of the other countries, Tunisia, maybe one day Saudi Arabia, but look for that in the second term. As far as Harris and the Dems are concerned, they're still trying to figure out why they lost, not only why they lost, but the size of it. They're blaming messaging, that their policies are right, but they just couldn't communicate the messaging. They're blaming black men, white women, and white women in particular, you're supposed to lie to your husbands. Look, Donald Trump won because he gave voice to over half of America that had felt disenfranchised and they had no voice, both from the elites in Washington and certainly what's now called the Democratic Party, which certainly is not your father's Democratic Party, which is now anti-Semitic in large part. Not all of the Democratic Party, but certainly the people driving the agenda here. Trump won because, like Reagan in 1980, he found a way to go around the media directly to the American people. Right. And they call it the legacy media for a reason. Legacy is usually something you leave behind when you're dead, your legacy. And if the mainstream media is not dead now, they should have been, because they were anything but honest brokers in this, telling us that Biden was fine, telling us that the economy was fine, even though every time we went to the grocery store or we fueled up with gasoline, it cost us more money. Trump won also because he was far more disciplined and messaging and campaigning than he was the first time around. Look for Trump to do more of that in his term, both discipline in messaging and discipline in policy. But most important is going to be the personnel that he appoints. I've been around politics long enough, 30 some odd years in and out of DC and in New Jersey politics, to tell you that personnel is policy, and who you pick is going to determine what your policy really is, because you can't be everywhere and everything. The other number to look at is the number 18. It is 2 years to the midterms. 18 months is what Trump is going to have to get things done in this election. The last time the Republicans controlled both chambers of Congress, as well as the executive branch, was in 2004. I was involved in helping on that. We lost in 2006 the House, and most parties that are in control in midterms lose seats. So you have to look at this as 18 months, and the Democrats know that. They also know that Trump is a lame duck president, meaning he cannot run for another term. He's term limited out. So first they're going to shoot for the 18 months, and you're already seeing the resistance starting. Democratic governors, other people stepping forward. The lawfare, or as the weaponization of the judicial system, is going to continue. It's just not going to be, against Trump. So ladies and gentlemen, the battle is not over. The battle is just beginning. We're fighting from higher ground, and that's fine, but there's still a lot of work to do. The hard work is now here. And let's not forget, MAGA, Make America Great Again, is really just recentering American politics back to their traditional core constitutional values. So really, MAGA is about American exceptionalism. And that's the monologue. Ladies and gentlemen, we are thrilled to have with us in the main show Hillel Fold, who is one of the leading tech influencers in the world, based out of Israel. Forbes dubbed him, let's see, Hillel, they call you the man transforming startup nation to scale up nation. That's a hell of a moniker to live up to. Hillel, welcome to Of the People. Thank you for coming in all the way from Israel.
Thank you for the kind words. It's a privilege and an honor to be here.
It's an honor to have you. And first and foremost, I want to thank you for being a part of Israel Appreciation Day. That's the event that we had hosted. Now we tell people out of Las Vegas. It has been, what I really want to talk to you about is something you said during your speech at Israel Appreciation Day. And I want to start with that the more that they persecute Israel and the Jews, the more innovation, right? You didn't really, I sort of get it, but I would love to hear from your perspective, because this is really the world you live in. Connect those two for me.
Yeah, sure. So we're all familiar with the phrase Am Yisrael Chai, the Jewish people live, but I don't know how many actually think about that phrase, right? It's not just an empty phrase. It's a historical reality, right? And if you don't believe me, then open your phone and check how many Babylonian friends you have, because I don't have any. Where are they? Where'd they go, right? Where's ancient Egypt? Where's the Roman Empire? Where's the Greek Empire? Where's the Nazi Empire? Where's the Soviet Empire? They're all gone. We're here, right? And, you look back really to the earliest days, even before we were the Jewish people, we were the Israelites in Egypt. And we were enslaved for 210 years. And the Torah, the Bible, and I don't mean the commentary on the Bible, I mean the Bible, literally says the more the Egyptians persecuted the Israelites, the stronger the Israelites, the more they reproduced and the stronger they got, which is the most counterintuitive thing in the world. You would think, they'd be persecuting us, we would not flourish, right? But that's our story. That's always been our story. And, we see that throughout history. And now we see it that the more they terrorize us, the more we innovate. You're looking at a country, I'll remind you and your viewers, smaller than New Jersey, in one might say the most dangerous neighborhood on earth, right? And yet you look at tech, you look at innovation, and Israel dominates across all sectors. There's no such thing as a sector of technology in which Israel is not a dominant player, which is, again, given the size and the volatility of the region, it's counterintuitive, but that is our story.
No, and I think that makes sense. Now, I guess the question that I really have is, we have in Judaism, obviously, the concept of to heal the world, right? One of the things my friends always ask me in the States is, how is it that such large swatches, the vast majority of of American Jews, vote Democratic when it's clearly, at least as it's currently construed, against their interest? You also brought up in that speech to Israel Appreciation Day, you brought up that the whole concept of heal the world, right? Tikkun olam, right? To heal the world, but you see it very differently in terms of through the lens of innovation, right?
Mm.
So what are all the, because that's what we really want to do. The only thing that people in this country really know, whether they're Jew or Gentile, is that Israel is Jewish homeland and Israel is a U.S. ally. But there's all this technology that Israel is responsible for that no one knows about.
Right. So first of all, just in terms of your original statement, I don't actually know the numbers, the accurate numbers about how many Jews voted for Kamala. I know that there are polls, but the polls are skewed because they left out many states. They were, the polls were taken in specific states. So I don't really know the exact numbers. I would find it very hard to believe that the numbers that they're reporting of like 70% of the Jews voted for Kamala, I would find that very hard to believe that that's true. Although crazier things have happened. But when it comes to tikkun olam, right? I want to be very clear. This isn't a question of like, we're better than anyone else, right? It's not what this is about. It's about, our value system, right? We value education, right? As opposed to our enemies that we know what they teach their kids. And so when, you put such a strong focus on family values and on education, you see the results and you see that, a completely disproportionate number of Nobel Prizes were granted to Jews. It makes no sense. Again, we're 0.25% of the population. So, and by the way, if you look at the media and you don't know that number, that we're 0.25%, but you think we're like 70% of the population because we dominate the news cycle, which is in and of itself a whole discussion. But as far as making the world a better place, I mean, you look at things like cancer research, right? I mean, I had the opportunity many years ago to interview a man named Dr. Rick Klausner, who is the director of the National Cancer Institute and the man that every U.S. president came to with a blank check and said, here, cure cancer. He managed more cancer research money than anyone in the world. And I had the chance to interview him and I asked him about, why is it that we have AI and, self-driving cars and drones and all this stuff, but we can't crack cancer? And he said, we have cracked cancer. He said, we've learned how to take a person's immune system and attack the cancer. And that blew my mind. He said, many of these cures are still in the labs, they're not FDA approved. But then he continued and he told me that all of these leading cures and treatments are all developed in Israel. All of them. It's wild. I mean, I'll just give you, one example among literally hundreds. If you look at the different types of cancer, right, there are some that are obviously, very hard to cure, pancreatic and things like that. But then there are types of cancer that are very curable, cervical cancer. So how are people still dying of cervical cancer? Because they don't get tested, because the test is very invasive. Comes along an American-Israeli entrepreneur, and he starts a company called Mobile ODT that developed some cutting-edge light technology that can detect cervical cancer with no physical contact with the patient. So it basically removes the entire kind of barrier. And this thing has been deployed in thousands of hospitals around the world. It's saving millions of lives. And that's just one example. And cancer is just one example, right? You look at mental health. I mean, the list is endless. When it comes to technology that's making an impact, Israel is leading the world.
It's fascinating to hear you talk about this because it's like that old argument: give a man a fish versus teach a man to fish, right? So there's one interpretation of this saying that's, oh, well, we're, basically socialism, right? Where, oh, we're just going to go give everything to everybody and nobody's going to have money and all the whatever, versus, no, we're going to go create things. We're going to go innovate. We're going to go change the world and make it a better place actively by creating.
Yeah, I mean, listen, someone recently said to me something that I just loved. It resonated so deeply. He said, I didn't come to Israel because I'm a Zionist. I came to Israel because I'm a capitalist, which is amazing, right? Because, when I was growing up, if you'd come to Israel, there was only one reason, and that's because you were a hardcore Zionist. Because back in the day, coming to Israel, you'd have to sacrifice a lot. You'd have to lower your quality of life compared to your American lifestyle. Today, Israel's at the pinnacle of the world of technology. And, I just came from a cafe 20 minutes from here, and I sat with some Americans who were visiting. And I said to all of them, I said, look around you. Do you feel like you're in a war zone? Yes, we're in a war.
Wow.
Yes, people are dying. Don't misunderstand. I'm not belittling, obviously, the losses and the devastation, but we move on. We move on with life, right? We don't forget, obviously, but we carry on. We got to do what we got to do. And again, that's our story. So, Israel is at the peak of capitalism. And if you look at the capitalistic world, Israel is at the top of the top.
Wow. I like it.
And explain the concept to our listeners of the unicorns, because I know you referenced that as well. I have to be honest, not a term I was familiar with. And again, in terms of the investment in capital in the companies in Israel, talk a little bit about that, because people need to understand, America needs to understand everything that's going on in Israel and why it's so seminally important beyond the U.S. ally and beyond just a Jewish homeland.
Well, that's really important. It's a really important point because, when our enemies talk about, a disproportionate number of, dollars foreign aid coming to Israel, they don't realize that this is a mutually beneficial relationship. In fact, if anybody's on the receiving end here, it's America, not Israel, right? The amount of technology that Israel ships to America is unparalleled, right? And so when it comes to tech, if I'm going to oversimplify for 1 second, there's, I guess you could say, two types of companies. There's a public company, which is, Wall Street, you could buy stocks, things like that. Then there are private companies, which generally are funded by venture capitalists and are owned privately. And so the term unicorn refers to a private company that has surpassed the valuation of $1 billion. It's called a unicorn because it was once upon a time very, very rare. Today, it's a little bit less rare, so maybe they did come up with a new term. But, that is what a unicorn means. And if you look at the number of unicorns in Israel, it's hard to believe, like literally hard to believe that Israel, this country, as I said before, smaller than New Jersey, has a tenth of the entire world's unicorns. So all of the billion-dollar companies in the entire world, Israel has a tenth of them. I think we've surpassed all of the unicorns in the entire European Union, which again is just it's staggering, right? But that's just one metric to look at when you look at the Israeli tech ecosystem. You could look at capital invested, just to give you context, just perspective here. In 2020, $11 billion were invested in Israeli startups. 2020, $11 billion, which I think we can agree is a pretty remarkable number for a country this small. 2021, $26 billion. We went from 11 billion to 26 billion in 1 year. It's hard to fathom, but that's the reality here. We are defying all logic, and it's just unbelievable to see that as we grow and grow, the media and the global communities, like, they can't sustain this. There's no way Israel can sustain this. This is a fluke. It can't. And then the next quarter comes and we break another record. It's unbelievable to watch.
So predict the future a little bit in terms of cutting edge. Am I stealing your questions, Erica?
No, I'm like, yeah, get out your crystal ball.
Well, so breakthroughs, new technology coming out of Israel that people don't know about. Where are the next breakthroughs coming from?
Here's the thing. We all know that in a couple of years, our cars are not going to have steering wheels, right? We know that. There's no secret. Autonomous cars are right around the corner. Now, by the way, I have to tell you, I hear your response and I hear that reaction. And I have to say right now, even if you take the current situation right now and you take autonomous cars compared to human drivers right now, there's no question that autonomous cars are safer right now.
No way. No way.
Listen, go do the research. 99% of traffic car accidents are human error.
Well,
It's
yeah.
just a fact.
Well, yeah.
So, right now, autonomous cars are already safer, but that's a whole different discussion. But when you talk about autonomous cars, just to get, I don't want to get too technical, but when you talk about autonomous cars, there are a few ways a car can drive itself, right? The obvious way are cameras, but cameras are very limited, right? Because it's too dark at night, if there's fog and things like that, it's not good enough. Then there's radar, right? You all remember like the radar things we had in our cars to detect when there was a cop coming, right? Radar is
I had them.
Radar,
I still have them.
Exactly. Right. So radar is limited in distance. Then there's something called LiDAR. Right? When you see an autonomous car today and there's that big thing on the roof of the car, that's LiDAR. That is the most accurate way for an autonomous car to operate. Now, what's the problem? The obvious problem is that it looks ridiculous, right? We're not going to drive around with those things on our roofs, right? Well, comes along an Israeli company and says, let's fix this. And the company's called Innoviz, and they built LiDAR that's this big. And I mean, you look at the new BMW 7 Series, fully autonomous cars using Israeli technology. And that's one. The other company that's going to facilitate autonomous cars is, of course, Mobileye. Other leading companies. So when we ride in our cars, and I'm not saying drive, when we ride in our cars in the next couple of years, your car is going to be powered by Israeli technology. There's no discussion, right?
Wow.
That's a fact, right? And that's just transportation. When you talk about, people don't realize this. People talk about the Iron Dome as if, oh yeah, no problem. We'll just detonate rockets midair that are flying at hundreds of miles an hour. Do you understand? I sat with Dr. Danny Gold, who invented the Iron Dome. He told me this story. Okay, this guy sat with the brightest minds in Israel in a room. He said, rockets are raining down on Israel. We gotta solve this problem. And everyone came up with their ideas, and he just, pardon my pun, he just shot them all down. He said, that's not good enough. That's not good enough. And then he came up with this idea to detonate rockets midair. And everyone thought he was absolutely crazy. The Israeli government said it's impossible. The Israeli army said it's impossible. The State Department, everybody told him it's impossible. And this guy built it. We have a system that detonates rockets at 96% precision. This is miraculous. But here's the thing. This is the part that people don't know. We talk about the Iron Dome. Those 2 nights when Iran attacked Israel, right? You had 3 aerial defense systems working in unison to perfection. You had the Iron Dome, which is the aerial defense system for the closer rockets. I think it's within 70 or 80 meters or some number. I don't know the exact number. Then you have David's Sling, which is, a farther away missile. right? Then you have the chet, the arrow, which is outside of Earth's atmosphere. You're detonating rockets and missiles outside of Earth's atmosphere. And these three systems worked those nights in unison to perfection. And I'm telling you, you can go listen to the interview with the guy who managed that whole operation. And he said the chances of those three systems working the way they worked are statistically impossible. Nothing went wrong. We detonated 99% of ballistic missiles and drones fired. It's unheard of. So from a defense perspective, we're blown away. But how many of us think about the tech involved in this? It is unprecedented. It is unbelievable to watch.
And so basically Reagan's Star Wars is now a reality because of Israel technology is what people need to understand.
100%. Go watch, listen, it's all available on the internet. You could go watch these. I mean, this just happened an hour ago, right? 2 long-range missiles from Lebanon were fired into Tel Aviv. 3 long-range missiles, sorry. All of them detonated, midair. I mean, this is Star Wars. You could go watch the video. It's wild. It's just absolutely wild.
And as you may have already spoken to this, so forgive me if this is a redundant question. And I'm a believer, and I've read my Bible. I'm pretty sure it says the Jewish people are God's chosen people. And so you don't have to say it. I'll say it for you. My Bible says the Jews are God's favorite. Okay. And we see evidence in history,
not favorite, chosen people.
Chosen. Good point.
It's a different concept.
Excellent point. Excellent. You are correct.
Very different.
God chose.
Let me interrupt you, Erica. Doesn't make the Jewish people better than any other people. Being
Correct.
the chosen people is an obligation and a responsibility.
Exactly. Exactly. Right. And that I think is important for people. Like, if unfortunately a lot of people don't know what the Bible says. So they don't really understand that. So thank you for correcting me. So part of me is going to be like, well, all of this success obviously is because of God, right? Like a lot of it has to do with that. And that's because I'm a believer, but also because I have faith in those things. So do you think that like that biblical grounding gives you the direction, or do you know what I mean? Like, is it that, does that build the culture of like you said, of capitalism, of trying to find things, of innovating? Is it that builds that culture, or do you think it's more secular than that?
So, I mean, listen, the state of Israel is obviously a secular state, right? We're not run by, the Torah doesn't dictate our law or anything like that. But, as a believer like yourself, I can't look at the current events and not see God. I mean, you'd have to not want to see God, right? I mean, here's the thing though, right? Like, again, in our history, back again to the Bible, we have this tendency, the Jewish people, to not see the miracles right in front of our eyes. I mean, people don't realize this, but in ancient Egypt, after God did the 10 plagues, he said, get out of here, go to the land of Canaan, go to the land of Israel. 80% of the Israelites stayed back in Egypt. 80%. Only 20% left. They're like, oh, yeah, I'm Egyptian. I'm going to stay. It's like hard to believe, right?
Subjugation's comfortable. I'll stay here.
Yeah, wait. Those 80% ended up in America voting for Democrats, but go ahead. Sorry, had to throw that in there, Hillel.
So this is a pattern. We don't see what's right in front of our eyes. And I'm going to say something. Right. I'm going to say something that many of your viewers are not going to like, and maybe even they're going to find maybe offensive. But I ask you to try to take a step back and think about what I'm saying from a historical perspective. Right now, we're in the middle of a devastating existential war, and we are in it, and it's hard to look at it objectively because we're in it. I get it. But let me ask you a question and try to be objective here, okay? If I told you in 100 years from now, okay, I told your grandkids, there was this country, a little tiny dot on the map, again, smaller than New Jersey, okay? You couldn't even see it on the map. And one day, 3,000 genocidal terrorists marched into this country with unlimited access to automatic weapons and 8 hours of free hand. Okay, just imagine that scenario. How many people would you have expected those 3,000 terrorists to murder? Think about it. They're spraying bullets in all directions for 8 hours. You should have expected 150,000 Israelis to have been murdered. You should have expected Israel to be wiped off the map. Now, let me just give a huge disclaimer. 1,200 people lost is the most devastating. Every single person that's lost is an entire world. And listen, I lost my brother to terror 6 years ago. No one has to lecture me about that, okay? I get it. But you have to. We owe it to ourselves to take a step back and realize, oh my God, they only, with air quotes, only killed 1,200 people. Where's the logic in that? It's unbelievable, right? So you know what? If you don't want to call October 7th a miracle because that's too hard for you to swallow, I get it. But tell me this. All of these rockets, the 10,000, 20,000 rockets that don't get detonated by the Iron Dome,
right.
where do they fall? I'll tell you where they fall. In empty spaces. Now, I don't know if you guys have been in Israel, but this country doesn't have any empty spaces.
There's no empty spaces.
Where are these falling? These are
I have been.
miracles. And you know what? In the desert, in the Bible, we had the clouds of glory. We walked through the desert with clouds surrounding us, right? And protecting us. And that is what the Iron Dome is. It's the modern day clouds of glory. And if you don't see God in this war, you don't want to see God in this war because it could not be more obvious.
I'm rarely speechless, Hillel, if you've listened to any prior podcasts, but that is so powerful. So I appreciate you sharing that. I want to turn, in the few minutes we have left, I want to turn to politics in the following regard. I know what we hear in the media here about the divisions in Israel, about people are against the war, people are against Netanyahu, but I have plenty of friends in Israel who tell me that that's not the case on the ground. And the Israeli people have not been more unified in sort of the battle against Iran ultimately, but whether it's Hezbollah, whether it's Hamas, that kind of thing. Through that lens, what was the Israelis' perspective on the election in the States? I assume it was viewed positively because there'll be no more talk of proportionate response or no more threatening to withhold weapon systems and things like that coming from a new administration. I have to assume it's looked at favorably, and there's almost universally so, question mark.
Yeah. So first of all, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to look at his actual presidency, right? People say you can't trust him. Forget his words. Forget the fact that he's pro-Israel in his rhetoric. Forget the fact that he just appointed, 4 different people that are super pro-Israel. Look, he was president for 4 years. Look what he did for Israel. He moved the embassy to Jerusalem. He recognized the Golan Heights. Trump is a friend of Israel's. Now, I want to be clear, and we could disagree on this. Do I think that I would hire Trump to babysit my kids? Probably not. Do I love his personality? No. I think he says some dumb things. I think he's met some dumb people. I think he's made mistakes. But is he a good president? Absolutely. Is he a friend of Israel's? Absolutely. The Biden administration, and I'm being nice, was an abusive partner. And I'm being nice, right? Sometimes they were good to us. Sometimes they were bad to us. Whatever they felt like doing that day. That's not a friendship, right? Trump has been a friend, a real friend to Israel. And so, when it comes to Israel, and again, I'm going to go back to the Bible. I can't help it. But our strength as a nation, and again, we see this literally. The first thing that the Bible says about the Jewish people as we became a people, we are standing at Mount Sinai about to get the Bible. And the Torah, the Bible says, they in Hebrew, and then I'll translate, Vayichan Sham Yisrael neged ahar, the Israelites parked by the mountain. Now, the word parked is used in singular. It doesn't say they parked, it says he parked. And so the commentaries say, why is it talking in singular? And the answer is because they were there like one man with one heart. We were unified. That is our strength, and vice versa. When we are not unified, our enemies smell our weakness. And we have documents retrieved from Gaza that Hamas blatantly states that the division in Israel is what caused them to do October 7th on October 7th. They were planning this. Wow. You know what? They were going to do it. But it happened on October 7th because of the division in Israel. And I want to say something. A lot of my friends, hundreds of my friends and colleagues are out there on Kaplan Street, protesting against Bibi. And I love and I respect a lot of these people. I do. And I think many of them have good intentions. I really do believe that. But I'm telling you that there is a real sickness that we know of, Trump derangement syndrome. We call it Bibi derangement syndrome. It is an obsession. Nothing he can do, nothing will he get right. And I'll just give you one example, because it's so blatant. He just fired the defense minister. Why did he fire the defense minister? Right. Because he wasn't loyal to the government. These people went to the streets burning Tel Aviv. How could he fire the defense minister in the middle of a war? The same people a day before were standing there yelling that we need to fire Netanyahu. Wait a second. So you could fire the prime minister in the middle of a war, but you can't fire the defense minister in the middle of a war? Like, the hypocrisy is staggering, right? Because they find a new agenda every single time, whether it's, the judicial reform, right? Whether it's the hostages, whether it's his trials and all the accusations that, of course, have gone away, right? And now it's the defense minister. They find a new reason to fight and to try to bring Bibi down. But you're not going to bring him down because he is a phenomenal leader who is leading this war better than any politician in Israel, perhaps in the world, withstanding this incredible, horrible, and tragic pressure from the State Department to end the war with all their arms embargo threats and everything that Biden. He's standing. They say don't go into Rafah. He says we're going into Rafah. He went into Rafah, and we killed the head of Hamas in Rafah. We had to go into Rafah, but the whole world said you can't go into Rafah. You can't go into Lebanon. And Bibi, so listen, we need to do what we need to do. That is something that very few politicians in Israel, maybe in the world, could have done more successfully than Netanyahu.
Mm.
Basically, what you're saying is divide and conquer is the same strategy that's being deployed both in the United States as well as in Israel, right? Divide America, pit them against each other, men against women, black against white, rich against poor, liberal against conservative, whatever fissure you can find, divide people. And then once they're distracted by the division, it's easier to rule, and then you invade. In your case, you were invaded by Hamas and Iran, not on the ground, boots on the ground, Iran, but ultimately this all comes back to Iran, as we all know. And we're invaded on our southern border and actually on our northern border as well. So it's the same techniques and strategies that are being employed by the opposition to bring down Israel, to bring down America as well.
Yeah, the West, basically. And
bring down the West, because that's, as we know, Hillel, this isn't about the Jews, right? If they drive us into the sea, right, river to the sea, as I said to my Christian friends, I said, "You're next."
You're next.
It's after they come after the Jews, they're going after the Christians. So
that's right.
Yeah, there's a very strong correlation between the anti-Netanyahu crowd and the anti-Trump crowd. The people that are on Kaplan who are, protesting against Netanyahu, many of them are not happy that Trump won, but the vast majority of Israel, is obviously feeling super positive about the election results. And the press, as we know, the media, they need clicks, and what gets clicks? Division gets clicks, right? And so, when we talk about this, the narrative you mentioned from the river to the sea, the list of internal paradoxes is mind blowing, right? I mean, we have the obvious ones, but we have the hostages were fed well, but there's no food in Gaza. Make up your mind, right? Gaza was an open air prison before October 7th, but it was paradise before October 7th, and Israel ruined it, right? We have, a ceasefire now, globalized intifada. Which one is it? Those things are mutually exclusive, right? The entire narrative is just full of paradoxes. And these people, they are out there chanting things. They literally do not even know what they're talking about. It is unbelievable to watch. In Ivy League colleges, otherwise intelligent people are saying things literally. They do not know the meaning of the words that are coming out of their mouths. It's, you see this, and you could either, get super depressed, or you could say, God, you got a sense of humor.
And God definitely
it's queers,
does have
it's
a
queers
sense
for
of humor.
right. Queers for Palestine is like chicken for Colonel Sanders. Try LGBTQ in the West Bank or Gaza. Or Iran. See how far that gets you. Right.
I just want to correct you one thing before I just want to say one more thing, because this is really important. I know that we see eye to eye on this. We have to be careful with the words that we say, because words matter. And we often fall into the trap of using words and narrative that our enemies have kind of instated as. And so I don't want to use the word West Bank. You know why people call it West Bank? Because they don't want to call it Judea and Samaria. They don't want to call it that, because when you say Judea, it sounds a lot like the word Jew, doesn't it? And so that implies that we are indigenous to this land.
Touché.
So let's just not use that word, right? Let's use the word Palestinian. What the heck is show me when an Arab Palestinian state ever existed in the history of the world. Let's call them what they are. Jordanians who just came into Israel, and you want to live in peace, but they're not Palestinian. You know who Palestinians are? Golda Meir was a Palestinian. Israelis were Palestinians. There was never an Arab Palestinian state in the history of the world. And that's important. Words matter.
And with that, ladies,
I appreciate the correction.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, if you've gotten something out of the conversation today, make sure to like the video, share it with your friends, and leave us a comment. Ask a question. Hillel Fold, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yes.
Thank you.
Any last words?
Well, where can they find you, Hillel? Where can they find you?
The internet is my business card. I'm HILZ, like zebra, FULD on all my Hills Fold. My mom used to call me Hills. My mom calls me Hills. So Hills Fold is my brand.
Yes.
You want to know if I have one last thing to say to you, and this is the most important thing, and that is that we will dance again, because if you look at all of our holidays, without exception, it's the same story. They came after us and we won, and we're here and we're dancing. And October 7th was incredibly dark, and there's no belittling that. But so was Purim, and so was Hanukkah, and so was Passover, and here we are celebrating. We will dance again.
Hallelujah.
Hallelujah is right. Amen. Socialism. The goal of socialism is communism. The world is quite familiar with socialism and the horrors socialism has brought with it. It wasn't that long ago. Actually, it's still with us. Socialism creeps into government slowly until it's too late. Socialism, the big lie. Yes, it could happen anywhere. This educational video was brought to you by the American Center for Education and Knowledge and paid for by people like you who care about the future of our democracy. Please help us continue our work educating the American public and consider supporting ASIC by making a tax-deductible donation at asicfund.org. And we are back, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Hillel Fold, live from Israel.
Yes.
And now joining us, Erica,
Yes.
John Sidolides, the head of Trilogy Advisors, geostrategic expert, diplomat as well. John, thank you for joining us on Of the People in part 2. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you and your audience today.
And it's a pleasure to have you. You know, we spent the first part of the show talking about Israel and the Middle East, but your expertise is really Southeastern Europe, you know, whether it's Russia or Croatia or, you know, Bosnia Herzegovina and somewhat into, I assume, Asia as well. We don't spend enough time talking about that, so I'm thrilled to have you on the show, John. What I wanted to really know is, because, you know, we hear about this axis, right? This new axis of China and Russia and
BRICS.
Iran, right?
Ish.
We hear about that. Trump just got elected. How does that change in your opinion? What should we look for in terms of geopolitics, or what I call real politics, capital R, small K, when Trump takes office?
Good question.
Well, sort of the same thing, Richard, because geopolitics sometimes is misconstrued as the complexity of international relations. And what it really comes down to is the immutable impacts of geography on the decisions that leaders take, whether they're the leader of the Chinese Communist Party in Beijing, the leader of Russia in Moscow, the leaders of Tehran, of Iran in Tehran, but the impacts of geography, neighboring countries, and features that determine and shape those decisions. So let's break this down. You ask a very important question, and let's look first at the two hot wars. When we are looking at Ukraine, we see very much that Vladimir Putin made very clear, whether rightly or wrongly, from our perspective, that Ukraine's membership in NATO was a red line that the West and NATO should never cross. And for 15 years, the US and NATO kept pushing Ukraine's membership in NATO. And then in February of 2022, Vladimir Putin made very clear he did not fear the United States or NATO. Our deterrent capability had weakened considerably. I would say probably more than anything else after the humiliating withdrawal from Afghanistan. The prior summer in August of 21. And so we now have a hot war that has resulted in the terrible, the needless deaths of 500,000 Ukrainians and Russians. In the end, Russia will likely keep the 20% of the territory that it has occupied for nearly 3 years. They have a 24/7 wartime economy production right now under Vladimir Putin's orders, and are out manufacturing not Ukraine, but the US and NATO combined in production of artillery, of rockets, of missiles. There's really no realistic way that Ukraine can be sustained for much longer. The average age, by the way, of a Ukrainian soldier today is 43 years old.
Wow.
That's not an army that can withstand not just a 4 times larger size population in Russia, but remember that Putin just brought in 10,000 North Korean troops.
Oh,
right?
and isn't China sending troops too?
Well, China is not
North
sending
Korea.
troops.
I thought North Korea is sending troops.
Yeah, North Korea is sending 10,000 troops. What China has been doing is exploiting loopholes in the US, EU sanctions on Russia, not to ship major weapons, but all of the parts and magnets and semiconductors and components that Russia needs to build this artillery, rocket, and missile machinery in order to devastate eastern Ukraine. And Ukraine's energy infrastructure in the eastern part of the country has been laid to waste. Yeah. This is going to be a $500 billion reconstruction project. Easily. And my concern here in Washington is the U.S. does not have $500 billion to spend on Ukraine. The EU does not have it. China may, but they also have a massive debt bubble to deal with regarding real estate and construction. So we're going to have a geostrategic hole, one of the largest countries in the Eurasian continent, between Russia and the European Union for decades to come as a result of the terrible mistakes that were made on the policy front in allowing this war to ever begin. So I applaud. I'm sorry, go ahead, Erica.
Well, I'm curious because,
Yep.
I've been hearing reports for the last couple of years about Ukrainian people coming across the southern border. So basically people young men fleeing, being conscripted into the army. And I'm like, so we were so worried about Ukraine getting into Russian hands that I guess we were cool with like destroying it and killing 500,000 of their people. Like,
Well, it
how
seems
is that
the
a better
thinking-
idea?
Yeah, it seems that the thinking in the administration, the Biden administration early on,
Mm,
was to exploit the divisions between Russia and Ukraine to arm Ukraine to weaken the Russian military. And I think we completely underestimated both Russia's military strength and also its financial durability and
the
resilience.
resolve.
In some ways, right now, the Russian economy is actually overheating because of the wartime production scale that Putin has ordered. And keep in mind one more thing for the two of you and for your audience. One of the things that we have omitted in understanding Russia, it's very much a commodity superpower. It not only ships oil and gas and coal to Europe and to other markets, it also ships timber, diamonds, natural resources, critical metals, rare earth elements, fertilizers, and foodstuffs to help
Wow.
feed billions of people in the global south, which is why most countries in Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America have checked out of the US-led sanctions regime on Russia. So they've been relatively ineffective sanctions. Ukraine does not have the wherewithal to continue to defend itself.
Yeah.
And the US has already obligated $175 billion for Ukraine's assistance over the last 3 years. And I think most taxpayers are asking, how much more support can we provide for Ukraine when we have so many problems here inside the United States?
That's right. That's right.
So let me ask you a question this way, John, because that is, there's so much that you touched on that we can sort of go off on tangents in terms of conversation. And we don't have, I wish we had more time, and we'll go through these. But here's my question. Two things. Number one is, Eric and I talk about this a lot, and we have said from the very beginning, whether or not we should have gone into Ukraine to begin with.
That's right.
It is not a war that Ukraine can win, period. End of discussion,
Mhm.
right? It's not a question of if they lose, it's a question of when. It's a
When.
question of when and what the peace terms will be or the settlement terms of the war will be. So I'd like you to talk about that as well. But the other thing is a much higher level conversation about just how we've treated Russia, because I've argued for a long time with this whole Russia hoax with Trump in 2016 and everything else, and forget about the divisions internally. But I would argue that it was our treatment of Russia that drove Russia into, let's call it China's camp. That Russia, and my guess is that over time, Russia will actually maybe come out of that orbit a little bit, and that might actually help us get a little closer to Russia, because yes, he's a strong man. Yes, he's a dictator. But didn't we in some way drive Russia into China's camp and help create this new axis by, I would call it, effectless foreign policy?
So a couple of great points that you raised there, Richard. First of all, I completely understand why the people of Ukraine wanted to defend their country, their territory, their nation against an armored assault, an armored invasion from a foreign country, from Russia.
Right.
The problem is that Ukraine was really in no position to be able to sustain a long-term defense against Russia. And keep in mind, Ukraine is not a member of NATO. The U.S. and the NATO alliance have no obligation to come to Ukraine's defense. This is a proxy war of choice. And if we look back at the history, this is all very recent, of course. There was actually a peace deal that was struck a month after the invasion in Istanbul in March of 2022. And both Putin and Zelensky were ready to sign a peace agreement. And then Boris Johnson flew from London to Kyiv, probably at the behest of the Biden administration, and persuaded Zelensky to renege on the agreement, to not proceed with that, and to count on the West to continue arming him So he's better able to defend his country until, of course, the West can no longer provide arms. That's where we are today. So it's very unfortunate. This war never should have started. Once it started, it could have been ended relatively quickly. And I think there have been some catastrophic errors in Western capitals that have now led to the destruction of at least the eastern half of Ukraine. On the second point, let's just say it's been wise, realist, strategic doctrine on the part of the United States to ensure that Russia and China are never closer to each other than either one is to the United States. And that was really the driving force between the Nixon strategy in the early 1970s of befriending the communist regime in China when we were going through a Cold War with the Soviet Union. And so we drove a wedge between those two countries and befriended China, relatively speaking. I mean, they are still a communist party, and we'll talk about them before this is over, because that's really the most important strategic danger facing the U.S. and the West. We talk about Russia, but Russia is not a direct threat to the U.S. the way China is. But I think we have made mistakes going back to the Bush administration. Again, their push for both Ukraine and the Republic of Georgia, a small republic in the Caucasus Mountains, a former Soviet republic, to join the NATO alliance that Russia felt would have undermined its strategic interests in that part of the Eurasian continent. And then increasingly over the last 10 years, a sense on the part of Russia that all of these color revolutions that we were supporting in Ukraine, in other parts of Eastern Europe, and even in South Asia, and even the Arab Spring, and all of those revolutions were of concern to Russia. So we have in some ways driven them closer to China. They've also opted tactically to be closer to China. I'm not sure there's much that we could have done in the last several years to pull them back, except maintain a dialogue with them. And I think one of the great errors of the Biden White House has been to cut off any direct communications between Biden and Putin for the last 3 years, when we have open communications with the most notorious dictator in the world, and that's Xi Jinping, which our business and investor community expects us to have because of the economic and financial interdependence of the two largest economies in the world.
So hold that thought. So John, hold that thought, because I do want to segue to China. But what I'm hearing you say, though, is that even going back to the Bush years, sort of the hubris we had about exporting democracy, and certainly to cultures that may not have the bedrock foundation to support a democracy, whether it's Iraq, whether it's Afghanistan, whether it's trying to sort of westernize Eastern European countries that don't have that bedrock foundation, has created this problem. Let me shift to China real quick, because I've certainly argued that part of the problem here is that China for the longest time has been at war with us, and we are not in war against China, in the sense that we don't acknowledge that they're at war, whether it's their investment in the Southern Hemisphere, whether it's the support now for Iran and for Russia. Talk to me, or talk to us, listeners, a little bit about what's really going on in China, because to most of us, I'm certainly not a China expert. There's a concern about Taiwan, whether they go into Taiwan, since obviously the U.S., based on all the war games, would not be able to respond in any sort of timely fashion to really forestall that. But also, we see China as this monolithic country, and I know there's a lot of things going on in China behind the scenes. So how does the Trump presidency, upcoming Trump 47, or Trump 47th president, affect that? And what's really going on in China with regards to the war against the U.S. that anybody who's paying attention should really see?
Yeah, one of the saddest aspects of the U.S.-China relationship that we see today is that the Chinese Communist Party has been relatively open about its ultimate aims. All one has to do is go to the Chinese websites, the Chinese government websites, look up the speeches, put them into Google Translate or DeepL, and read them in English. They've been quite open. They intend to have a world-class military that can project power on a global scale, basically become a peer and a challenger of the United States by 2049, which is the centennial of the Chinese Communist Party coming to power in Beijing in 1949. They have two technology programs underway right now in order to compete with the US-led Western technological dominance of the last 50, 60 years, so that one initiative called Made in China 2025 will have hundreds of billions of renminbi, but dollars equivalent, invested in the major new technologies that will dominate the 21st century global economy. Artificial intelligence, robotics, quantum computing, electric vehicles, renewable energy. And you see in electric vehicles and solar panels and wind farms, they already have a commanding lead over their Western competitors because of government subsidies, because of intellectual property theft, because of forced technology transfers, all of these things in violation of their membership in the World Trade Organization. And so they're competing with us on the technological front, they're competing with us on the military front, and especially with Taiwan, Richard, the point that you raise. Xi Jinping has given the People's Liberation Army orders to have a Chinese military that is ready. Not that they're going to do so necessarily, but to be ready to invade Taiwan by 2027. Well, the problem that we have in the United States is sort of, several-fold. One is our own domestic defense industrial base has been utterly hollowed out. And I think you and your audience would be shocked to learn that there are dozens of American companies, defense contractors, that are approved suppliers by the Defense Logistics Agency that rely on Chinese subcontractors for, again, as we discussed before, in supplying Russia with the wherewithal to be able to build up its military against Ukraine. The Chinese subcontractors provide semiconductors, magnets, components, ball bearings, parts, everything that we need to be able to build our large systems. So in the event of a diplomatic crisis over Taiwan, I wouldn't be surprised if the Chinese Communist Party informs Washington that there are several supply chain hiccups in everything that we need to maintain our own domestic military capability and to protect our allies in the Pacific region. But I think what's going to be interesting with Trump coming to back to the White House is that the trust that maybe he had in Xi Jinping before COVID is gone. And I think the way that Xi Jinping betrayed not only Trump's trust, but that of leaders around the world, knowingly infecting the entire world by allowing for international flights from Wuhan around the world as late as January and February of 2020, when the Chinese authorities knew that a pandemic had been unleashed within their own country, to ensure that China alone doesn't suffer the consequences of COVID, means that personal relationship is tattered. And I think also in terms of trade, Trump is very serious about imposing high tariffs, not only on electric vehicles, but a whole host of goods that will affect our industrial base and Trump's capacity to rebuild the worker base here in the United States. So I think we're in for rough patches between Washington and Beijing, but really because of Beijing's nefarious and aggressive activities, both against its neighbors, geopolitically, and on the international commercial front.
And there's no question that China is public enemy number one, in my opinion, to the United States, and they are vying for hegemony against the U.S. Anyone who's looking at that is, has to see that. I guess the thing that concerns me, John, and you touched on it as well, is the supply chain, and it's not just the those kind of parts. It's the commercial off-the-shelf software that China has in this country. It's the supply chain on medicine. It's they bought they're buying up into not only farmland here, they're buying up manufacturing. There's a large pork producer. There's just so many things that China is sort of insidiously sort of inserting themselves into the U.S. economy. That's a concern.
Not to mention all the underground Chinese police bases and the spy balloons floating all over the country and all the other stuff.
And one more thing, that we would be remiss if we did not mention what they're doing to destroy American society from within by the export of fentanyl precursor materials and pharmaceuticals to the Mexican cartels. The Chinese government controls everything that goes in and out of that country. They could shut down the fentanyl operations today if they wanted to. They have chosen to destroy us and corrode us from within and to sow division inside this country, as you correctly note, Erica, through social media, through a whole host of other nefarious operations.
Yeah, and it's not hidden. They're not hiding it.
No, they're not hiding it.
This feels like a hot war just because there's not, tanks and soldiers. I don't know how this isn't war.
Well, it's non-kinetic so far, and we pray that it stays that way. I don't think any sane person wants to see a war between the United States and China. which would be catastrophic for both sides. But as an American, especially concerned about my fellow Americans, but I would say this is very much a cold peace. And this is probably going to stay this way for quite some time to come while we try to address two hot wars, the Middle East, of course, and Ukraine. And we haven't even touched on a number of wars in different parts of the world that may not be of strategic consequence to the U.S., but let's not fool ourselves. War is a condition that is taking place in parts of South America, in parts of Africa, in parts of South Asia. It's a terrible situation.
Well, go through that, John. John, go through some of those.
Well, if we look at the Congo, for instance, which is the largest country in Africa, there's been a war going on there for 20 years. Millions of people have been killed there, but it's a relatively obscure war from a strategic perspective. I mean, it's important now in terms of natural resources, cobalt and other rare earth elements that we need for the technological economy that drives the West and our Asian allies and our European allies. But there's a horrific war taking place there amongst various tribes. We have a war taking place between Ethiopia and Eritrea and the Horn of Africa in the eastern part of the continent. We have, of course, ongoing guerrilla activities in Colombia and Peru. And in South Asia, we still have very difficult situations between Pakistan and Afghanistan, between India and Pakistan, and even in Southeast Asia.
Wasn't there, and isn't there, oh gosh, which countries is it? Isn't like Brazil trying to like take over or like invade one of the countries next to it because it's got a bunch of oil or something?
It's not Brazil, Erica. It's Guyana has these massive oil reserves right off of its northern coast, and Venezuela next door has been threatening to invade Guyana just to overtake this western slice of territory and then the exclusive economic zone in the Caribbean Sea that comes with that territory in order to absorb Guyana's oil reserves.
Well, and it's like you guys plundered your own opportunities. You guys screwed up and squandered your own resources. So now instead of, I don't know, taking a, time for self-reflection and thinking, are we managing ourselves well? We're just going to go steal other people's stuff.
Welcome to socialist dictatorship in Caracas.
Well, and it's interesting that you had mentioned the different things about Africa as well, because those people just don't know that these things are going on. And it's like you said, that is going to affect everything in the economy. It affects the supply chain of every single piece of, your phone, my microphone, the computers that we're on. You may not think unrest in Africa or Asia is a problem, but it's coming to your doorstep eventually.
And when we deal with the reality that our mobile devices and smartphones derive the cobalt they need to be able to operate from mines in the Congo that essentially use child and slave labor, right? All anyone has to do is a little bit of research on their own. Right. And it presents a moral conundrum for those of us who enjoy this exceptional quality of life in the West. But if we go back to where all of these materials come from, they're extracted in very horrific ways. And the same thing applies to solar panels and wind turbines. If one looks at the ingredients that are required to build these parts, it's not clean energy at all. It's actually very dirty, environmentally dangerous. The end product may look clean, and that's a whole different discussion about what mistakes the West is making. Basically, energy suicide because of sort of self-motivated energy poverty, when we should instead be energy abundant, energy resilient, and energy independent.
I like it.
John, my response to you is why let facts get in the way of a new religion?
But that's exactly it. When you're dealing with the religious concept of eco-radicalism, the problem is, though, that look at what's happening in Germany, the economic powerhouse of the European Union, and it has actually entered a period of deindustrialization.
Yeah.
Because of these insane, ludicrous, delusional, utopian energy policies. They shut down 6 nuclear plants. They think that a country that gets very little sunshine and has intermittent wind can rely on renewables. And they actually have had to, they've torn down a German village to excavate beneath it and extract lignite, which is the most polluting form of coal, because they don't have the baseload they need to keep their economy humming 24/7.
That is
disastrous government policies in Berlin.
And I would add to that they were at the forefront of multiculturalism in Europe and the European Union,
Yep.
which has radically changed the fabric of the populace there, right? And again, it's the same. One man's freedom fighter is another. One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. It's just the whole concept of the nation state has gone away, and we're supposed to be one world, one nation, and therefore, everybody is the concept of good and evil doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
And that's and I think that's evident in what you're seeing in the European Union. John, I want to close with you on this question, which is, and I touched on it before, China appears to be this monolithic country, but they have their own internal problems going on now, don't they?
Big
Because
time.
because Xi Jinping has some internal issues that he's going to have to deal with that hopefully someone like a President Trump, as opposed to a President Biden, will be able to help use as negotiating tools. What are some of the issues that China is dealing with internally?
Right. Very important question that you ask. First of all, economically, right now they are in a period of excess industrial capacity and labor capacity, which is why they're exporting products all around the world instead of investing in their own economy and propping up consumer spending for domestic purposes. But by doing so, they're dropping prices around the world and threatening the major industries in East Asia, in Europe, and here in the United States. So they have to figure out a way to balance the economy. The problem is it's still a communist government. And when they issue commands, such as artificially propping up the real estate sector for the last 15, 20 years, now that sector is very wobbly. And we in the West have been waiting for the real estate market to collapse in China for years. There's been all of this infusion of government funding and government regulation to prop it up. But one wonders, how long will it last before market forces dominate? But then you also have skyrocketing youth unemployment, anywhere from 20 to 25%. And of course, it's very difficult to believe communist data about any of their economic activities because, again, they're propagandists first and free market capitalists, well, last on the free market side. We also have this phenomenon now of many young Chinese using technology to be able to access vistas from around the world and seeing how young people elsewhere are able to proceed with their own career decisions and the like. And they have this sort of protest movement of laying on the ground, refusing to participate in the kind of 6 hours a day, 6 days a week, 15-hour a day work weeks, as opposed to what we're seeing in the West. So we have that kind of rebellion taking place. We also have very much of a demographic decline in absolute terms because of the disastrous one-child policy that was enacted several decades ago. And where families are having one child, they tend to be having more men than women, boys than girls. And so over time, you will have insufficient number of Chinese women for Chinese men to marry, and they will have to actually begin importing women from neighboring countries so you don't have social unrest in the country from a cohort of millions or tens of millions of unmarried men who cannot identify wives. So you have a number of these issues here. But again, back on the economic front before we close, because China is so dependent on the U.S. market for its exports, Trump really has tremendous leverage going into any trade negotiations because of the threat of tariffs. If the U.S. market is closed off to China, they're going to go into a very, very deep recession, and that's a must avoid for Xi Jinping. And I think Trump understands this, and it's going to be his strongest card when they begin negotiations with Beijing.
And one other thought. The Economist always said during the election that Trump's tariff will raise the cost to Americans because of all the imported goods. I would argue that most of Americans would say, if I'm buying U.S. made products, I'm willing to pay more. I'm just not willing to pay more to import something from China or some country that's trying to kill us. So because I'm one of those people, Erica, I know you are, I'll pay more if it's made in the USA.
I don't need as much stuff.
The
Realistically.
greatest living economist in the United States today, and he's in his 90s, so we pray he lives for many, many more years and decades. Thomas Sowell teaches us there are no perfect solutions to any problem, only trade-offs.
That's right.
And yes, that may be the trade-off, at least temporarily, that we pay somewhat higher prices for mobile devices or TVs or other electronic goods that are fun and amusing. But if we're helping to rebuild the American industrial base and let workers work close to home and not have to learn to code, as many people told them to do, or to leave their homes and their communities
Exactly.
for faraway places. But what we need is national leadership to explain to the American people why simply having cheap goods does not make for a good life.
Mm.
And there are different things, different characteristics of a good life. And that may mean also that we provide for middle class stability in America again, rather than the hollowing out of communities, especially across the Rust Belt that has suffered so tremendously from the outsourcing of industry to China and other countries over the last 20 years.
Yeah. John, I think that is an excellent place for us to end the conversation today. We thank you all for watching. If you have been watching for the whole show, we thank you. We hope that you've gotten something out of it. If you feel so inspired, go ahead and subscribe to the channel, like this video, share it with your friends, because we've had some awesome guests. Robert
and John, before we go, where can people reach you? Trilogy Advisors, your Twitter handle.
TrilogyAdvisors.net, Sidelides.com, and on X Twitter, it's simply my name in lowercase letters.
Excellent.
All right. I was told before that we got you on the show that you were one of those guys that's the smartest in the room guys. You have clearly lived up to that standard, John. Thank you so much.
I doubt that highly, but thank you. I appreciate the good work. Thank you.
If you know anything about me, is I don't usually sling a lot of BS. So if I said it, I meant it.
Yep.
So thank you for coming, and please come again. I think there's so much more we need to talk about. Ladies and gentlemen,
be a pleasure.
John Sidelides, Trilogy Advisors, Robert Chernin, Erica Reddick of The People. Thanks for staying with us this week for our special edition. We'll see you next week.
Bye.